Hello and welcome to WION's Global Leadership Series. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay and today's interview is special. I say this because with me is not a head of state or government. With me is a leader who heads the world's biggest multilateral organization. The President of the United Nations General Assembly, Abdulla Shahid. Mr. President, welcome to WION.
My pleasure. I
want to start with by reiterating what the Prime Minister of India said, that your presidency is a matter of pride for the developing world. I also want to add that it comes with a lot of expectations from developing countries like India. Mr. President, do you have a list of things that you want to achieve during your tenure?
I came to the UN General Assembly presidency promising a presidency of hope. Given the despair, death and devastation that we have seen world around during the last 18 months, I believed that we needed to lift humanity from the conundrum of a spiral of downward depression. That is why I wanted to bring in a presidency of hope. And the presidency of hope is based on 5 rays of hope: responding to COVID-19, rebuilding sustainably, recovering from the needs for the planet, respecting the rights of all, and reforming the United Nations. These 5 rays of hope are the fundamentals of the presidency of hope, and I hope to build on these. I'm very encouraged by the general debate which we have just concluded. The leaders of the 194 countries who spoke have embraced the presidency of hope. The message of hope that they have delivered is for sure something that is promising for humanity.
Right, like an exhaustive agenda, and there's one ray of hope in particular that I'm going to focus on, and that is reform of the United Nations. How much progress has that made?
Well, we have just started the debate. Reform of the United Nations have 2 basic components: revitalizing the work of the General Assembly and reforming the Security Council of the United Nations. Both the items are membership driven, and I am hoping that given the need for substantial progress in sending a message of confidence to the constituents, we need to make some progress on this, and the membership would come up doing that.
In your consultations with world leaders, do you believe that there is consensus on the need to reform and on the need to have more countries as permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, countries like India?
Well, there is definitely a consensus being built on the need for reform. I do not think that there is any dispute on whether to reform or not. It is how to reform, the question is. And for that, definitely we will have to get the membership to proceed with the consultations that they are carrying out.
Specifically on India's case, it's the world's largest democracy, it's the 5th largest economy, it's the biggest contributor to the UN peacekeeping forces, and yet India is out of permanent membership of the Security Council. Do you believe it's time that countries like India got their rightful place?
Who gets what has to be decided by the membership. It is not the President of the General Assembly to comment on this, because there is an ongoing process. And I should give room for this consultation to proceed.
But you agree that it's been 7 decades since the United Nations was formed, and the world order has changed, and the current constitution of the United Nations, especially the Security Council, should reflect the changed world order?
For the Security Council to have credibility, the realities on the ground should be reflective in the Security Council. And that is very clearly seen in how we are dealing with these situations.
Interesting that you bring up the subject of credibility. And many critics say that the UN's credibility has taken a beating in the last couple of years in the response to the pandemic and the failure, quote unquote, of multilateral organizations like the United Nations to effectively respond. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do not. I think that the multilateral organizations such as the United Nations have been responding. Of course, during this pandemic, this is a pandemic which has hit the entire humanity with such force that we have all been unprepared. But during these 18 months, the United Nations continued to function virtually. At the initial stage, I have been able to bring the United Nations back into in-person in a hybrid format. So we are responding. But yes, not to the expectation of the constituents, we the peoples.
No, I must congratulate you for the way the United Nations General Assembly was finally convened, and a lot of leaders flew into the US to participate in person, and many others participated virtually. I'm talking about the response to the pandemic and agencies like the World Health Organization that took very long, some say, to declare a pandemic and have still not held China accountable. And the bias that Dr. Tedros has been accused of towards China still remains a point of concern for many. How do you expect the world to take UN and its agencies seriously and see them as part of the solution if these questions remain?
Humanity has been able to come up with a vaccine in record time. This has never been seen. We have launched a vaccination program worldwide, so wide that this is something that we have never seen. But yes, it is still not up to the expectation, and it is not enough. More needs to be done. That everyone has agreed.
But you've not commented on the role of the WHO.
WHO is trying its best, and I think as President of the General Assembly, I salute the work that they have been doing under very difficult circumstances. But none of us, none of the organizations, none of the national governments, no one has been able to meet the expectations, and that is agreed.
Why do you think that is the case?
Because we have been hit so hard, that none of us were prepared. We have to be prepared for the next pandemic.
Is it just the pandemic, or is it also politics that has hampered the functioning of the United Nations and its agencies?
What we have come to know through this pandemic is that no one is safe until everyone is safe. Now, this is synonym for multilateralism. We have to, in our heart, believe that we are so interconnected. And we had seen through a pandemic, this small virus has shown us that we can't continue arguing. We have to come together. Unity is the only strength that will save us, and multilateralism is the only way to go forward.
But unity on whose terms is a question, sir. We saw in the case of Myanmar, 3 countries decided that the representative of Myanmar will not speak at the UNGA, and that was the decision that was followed. What happens to the United Nations Security Council?
I am sorry that no country has decided that Myanmar will not speak. We have rules of procedures here, and the rules of procedures are being followed. There is a committee on the credentials, and they are meeting in November, and their report will be adopted by the General Assembly. So it is up to the membership of the United Nations to decide on these things.
But the member was not allowed to address the Assembly.
I am not aware of it. As President, I am not aware of anyone not allowing. I am the person who will either allow or not allow.
Did the Myanmar representative make an address at the UNG?
There was no request by the Myanmar delegation to speak.
That's very interesting, and that's news to me. I will follow up on that. So let's talk about the mission.
Let me just let you know, I've just completed the general debate at the General Assembly Hall, and the list of speakers were exhausted, meaning everyone who requested to speak were given the floor. 194 delegations spoke. And therefore...
Myanmar was not one of them, though. You're saying they did not make a request?
They were not on the list of speakers because they did not request to speak.
The mission of the United Nations, from what I understand, is peace, dignity and equality on a healthy planet. As things stand today, peace is being threatened by some countries which follow an expansionist agenda, especially in South China Sea. Dignity and equality are under threat because of certain policies within those countries, like what's happening in Xinjiang. And we are in the middle of a health crisis, courtesy a pandemic that originated in China. Would you say that countries like China pose a threat?
I'm the President of the General Assembly. I'm elected by the members. As the President, it is my job to unify the membership. So it will be highly, highly unfair for me to comment on a question to brand a country either way or not. So I think as President of the General Assembly, it's not my place to answer that question.
I understand. As the President of the General Assembly, does it bother you that countries which have a very poor domestic record on human rights end up on the United Nations Human Rights Council?
The United Nations Human Rights Council is an elected body. It's up to the members to elect them, and therefore the President has no role in either way the members vote.
Is this in essence the biggest challenge for the United Nations, that while there are rules, while there are members, while there is this entire paraphernalia, a lot of the decisions made are non-binding, that the bureaucracy overtakes the actual purpose?
The United Nations is run, first and foremost, guided by the Charter of the United Nations, which brings every country, all the countries, together. And that's what the General Assembly does. And that is why the General Assembly gives each and every country one vote, irrespective of size, irrespective of power, wealth, whatever. Each country has one vote. And that proves to the world the message that comes from the General Assembly. The power of the General Assembly is the moral authority of the majority of the countries. And that's what it is. And that is what multilateralism is all about. It is not about one country against the other. It is about all the countries coming together.
I know we are in the mecca of world diplomacy, and you're speaking like a diplomat, but you're also a politician. And while we understand that every country has one vote, there are first among equals. And there are countries that tend to have more influence than others, and you would know that. And that is why this is not a perfect democracy, and that is why I ask that, do you think it's time, when we talk about reform, to also make some changes to ensure that the United Nations, its policies, its moves, actually have an impact on the ground?
You said it, Palang. You said it. We are in the mecca of diplomacy. And I hold the presidency, and my task is to unify the countries. So, for a change, I will have to change my head from a politician to a diplomat. And I will not be able to comment on political line either way. So you will have to excuse me on these questions. This is the United Nations.
So then we come back to the question of the relevance of the United Nations. And as President, sir, how are you trying to bring various countries and members together to impress upon them that this system is not going to be effective and will be rendered irrelevant unless these things are changed?
Dialogue, consultations, face-to-face meetings, which would hopefully avoid conflict. And it has in the past proven that it is always better to have the option of dialogue, consultation and conversation.
I wanted to come back to the question of China, but you don't want to talk about China.
The way that you are asking, I can't. I can't brand
How should I
countries. I can't brand countries either way or the other. As long as I am the president of the General Assembly, who is supposed to unify. I'm a symbol of unification of the United Nations. Unfortunately, I can't give you an answer which you are seeking as long as I am in this position.
Let's talk about climate change then.
Yes.
Do you think that the countries that really pushed for climate action are themselves doing their bit? Countries like India, for instance, have met their Paris goals, and we're looking at a COP summit later. But do you believe that the developed world is doing enough to counter climate change?
I believe that time is ticking. And as I said in my opening remarks during the general debate, we are not only on the wrong path, we are on the cliff. So it is not for individual countries to ask whether the others are doing enough. It's a time to start asking one's own self, starting from yourself and me and everyone around. Are we doing enough? Let us not say whether the developing countries and developed countries and the island nations and landlocked countries. For once, at this point in time, we have to start talking about, am I doing enough? In 1987, when the Maldives started talking about sea level rise, it was not the fashionable thing. In fact, some of the larger countries, they couldn't understand even whether, what's this sea level rise thing? It was not received. It was before this, the whole issue became fashionable. And at that time, and the decades that followed, it was the view of many that, okay, the small island countries will go underwater, and then people will move on to high ground, and we'll be there. But no, it didn't happen that way. Desertification, the situation in the Sahel, the Sahara is, the desert is creeping up on these islands, on their land. The glaciers are melting, the icebergs are melting, forest fires are increasing, storms are raging as we have never seen. So this is not affecting just one group of people. It's affecting the entire planet. So we should stop talking about who does what. We should start talking, what can I do? So I ask everyone in every country to stand up, ask their governments to do their bit, because we are on the cliff. Before we fall, let's do it. That is what COP26 is about.
My final question to you. What has been the highlight of your presidency at the UNGA?
Well, it has just started. So far, the highlight is the general debate, which I have just finished. It's a great success because we have had over 100 heads of state, heads of governments speak, and 194 countries speak. The message is clear. This was a message of unity, a message of coming together. What countries wanted to be, their ultimate destination is very clear. It's how they want to go there. That's where the dispute is. But I am confident that we will be able to get through it because ultimately, as a Maldivian, I have always trusted in the goodness of humanity.
In a world of wolf warrior spokespersons and leaders talking each other down on Twitter and social media, do you believe diplomacy still has a chance?
There's no other choice but diplomacy. And if anything we learned from the pandemic is that multilateralism is the only choice. Yes, it's not the best, because there is no best way, there is no better way, until such time the only way forward, way for survival is talking to each other. And that is the multilateral system. No one is safe until everyone is safe.
That's right.
Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I know it's been a long day for you, a long week for you, but you sat down with us to take our questions. Thank you.
I'm sorry I can't, I have other engagements, and I would have loved to be here and talk to you more. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.